Good evening, everyone. I am Sejal Dalvi, the PCGT Campus Ambassador, and it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome here our speaker of the day, Ms. Sumaira Abdulali, Mr. Julio Ribeiro, the founder trustee of PCGT, Dr. B.B. Sharma Sir, the principal of Vaze College, and all the dignitaries and the participants present here today. I, on behalf of Public Concern for Governance Trust in association with Vaze Youth Parliament and Vaze Model United Nations, organized in collaboration with UN Information Center for India and Bhutan by the Political Science Department of KET's VG Vaze College, Mumbai, would like to welcome you all to this webinar on the topic Draft Environmental Impact Assessment Notification 2020. I would like to welcome our speaker, Ms. Sumaira Abdulali, who is an environmentalist from Mumbai, founder of the NGO Awaaz Foundation, and convener of the movement against intimidation, threat, and revenge against activists, Mitra. She was co-chairperson of the Conservation Subcommittee and honorary secretary of Asia's oldest and largest environmental NGO, the Mumbai Natural History Society, and is currently a governing council member. Through legal interventions, advocacy, and public campaigns, contribution to documentary films, television debates, and press articles, she has successfully mainstreamed and built consciences about previously known environmental hazards, notably noise pollution and sand mining, and has won national and international awards of her work. She also set up the first network for protection of activists in India in 2004. She has been referred to as one of India's foremost environmental activists. Thank you, ma'am, for gracing us with your presence here.
It's such an honor to be here with Mr. Ribeiro, who I have so much respect and regard for, and PCGT's at that time when it was founded, and Mr. Deshmukh and Mr. Ribeiro. And Mr. Deshmukh was also the founding chairman of Mitra, which you just talked about, the movement against intimidation, threat, and revenge against activists. And PCGT mentored me at that time. So I'm so honored to be here and to speak to all of you about the environmental impact assessment notification, which has been given to us in draft form, and which has done us all the great favor of creating unprecedented public participation in an environmental issue. When 20 lakh suggestions and objections, mostly objections, were received by the Environment Ministry through the efforts of young people taking this issue online, and during the COVID lockdown, when the draft notification was first issued, taking it up in a way which had not been taken up before. I believe the previous record for suggestions and objections to anything was on a completely unrelated subject of TRI. So for an environmental issue to receive 20 lakh objections, it means the notification is really something. So let me tell you about this environmental impact assessment notification and why people are so upset about it. India as a country, our political leadership has always talked about environment being so paramount of importance to all of us, right from the time of Indira Gandhi, who was an environmentalist at heart and mentored and made sure that the environment was protected by enacting various laws to protect the environment. And then it has subsequently become more and more of a difficult subject, an impediment to business, a problem for industry. And although we keep up the sentiment that environment is very important, we don't really act on it anymore. Even traditionally, India has always been very close to the environment. We have had sacred groves which we have worshipped, and we continue that. Our Prime Minister has received a number of environmental awards internationally, and we keep hearing about how we are so committed to reducing our pollution, but we remain the most air polluted city in the country in the world. 10 of the top most air polluted cities in the world are in India. In this scenario, when the lockdown happened, and just as a background, the lockdown happened because of a disease called COVID-19, which is a direct result of man's interference with nature by creating too close proximity between nature and wildlife and human habitation and settlement. We've cut down forests, we have unprecedented amounts of conflict with wildlife, and wildlife comes into contact with us. That gave rise to this virus, which originated as something which bats had, but humans did not. And in that situation, where the whole world practically got locked down, and we had been talking about environment in the world before lockdown, locked down by this virus, and we had to all stay at home. In March, just around that time, the Ministry of Environment and Forests came out with a new draft notification to amend a notification which was originally a part of, which is still a part of the Environment Protection Act of 1986, but has been issued in, it was first issued in 1994 after the Bhopal gas tragedy, when so many people were affected by an environmental pollutant arising out of the chemical emissions. Thereafter, the notification was amended again in 2006, and the new draft amendment came out in March 2020. This amendment, for the first time, so right from then, from after the Bhopal gas tragedy, we have been recognizing the need to have independent regulation when new industry is set up or when an existing industry is expanded, and particularly so when this industry is in an area or a zone which is in some way fragile, whether it's a forest, a coast, or any other place where it is fragile, or where there are pollutants likely to be emitted which are going to harm human health. Environment and human health are very closely linked, as we have seen by COVID-19. And in this situation, the new notification of 2020, which talks about creating more regulation and which says that it is the preamble to it says it is to make more transparent and expedient environmental impact assessments so that we have better governance. At the same time, what the notification actually does is to cut down on every kind of environmental parameter which existed till now. And a number of industries, 40 industries, have been exempted completely from the need for environmental impact assessment. Among them are some of the things that I have worked very closely with, and so I will discuss this notification with direct reference to the work that I have done on, say, sand mining, because sand mining is one of the sectors which has been exempted. In particular circumstances, which is either it is manual or if it is below of various sand mining sites, it can be considerably more than the effect of each sand mining site, and typically these sites are clustered together to form clusters. So when you have sand mining, which is used, sand is the most extracted material in the world after water, and yet nobody knows about it and very few people talk about it. We started talking about it in India, and it became a worldwide subject when it became understood that actually sand was being used to construct almost our entire built civilization, from roads to bridges to schools to houses to everything else. So to exempt sand mining from environmental impact assessment seems to be to demonstrate in a very clear way as to what kind of impact this particular notification is going to have. Sand mining is surrounded by a mafia which is politically controlled. I myself was attacked twice by the sand mafia. I was nearly killed the second time. The first time I was hospitalized. And it's after that that we came to know a little bit more about this whole issue of sand mining. It's become clear over the 20 years since that time that the sand mafia has murdered not only activists, but they have attacked government officers and murdered police officers, villagers, anybody who stands in their way. At the same time, the regulations around sand mining have not really become stricter. In fact, this particular environment impact assessment notification is among those legislations which have allowed this kind of an activity to continue unchecked and put not only the health of citizens at risk and put our cities at even greater risk of impact of things like climate change and sea level rise, but have put the government officers and police officers at risk of their lives when they try to regulate it under laws which do not give them adequate policing powers. Under these circumstances, to leave something like sand mining to a district level authority and not allow the environment impact assessment to take place before the sand mining begins, to allow an activity like this and leave it to a collector or to a local police officer who's at risk of his life to control this activity, tells you what's going to happen when you remove prior environmental impact assessments from the whole regulatory regime. So what exactly has this regulation done, not only to sand mining, but to other things, to make sure that such activities can continue without prior assessment? And why has this particular notification given us so much, 20 lakh objections from people all around the country? Under the excuse of ease of doing business, all of us want ease of doing business, all of us want the economy to improve and come back to what it should be. Under ease of doing business, we have come out with this notification where people cannot object to a project. If prior to the project starting, only government agencies can object. I recently watched a talk given by Jairam Ramesh, our ex-environment minister, online, where he said that when he was environment minister, 99.9% of violations were brought to his notice by civil society, by NGOs, by communities who were affected, and not by government agencies. Under this circumstance, to not allow any ordinary people to object, I think that is something which has created so much disturbance in the mind of people, because it's us who are going to face the consequences of violations, and we are not given a voice to object to projects which we know are going to affect our public, our health in such a direct manner. So the public hearing norms have been completely diluted for almost all categories, and in some categories they've been done away with altogether. In certain categories, for example, sand mining and other local places, the objections can only be made by people who reside within that particular district. That means, say if you have a coal mining site, people from other places cannot even make objections, which lets out many of the large NGOs. 40 coal mining licenses are being granted in pristine forest areas, and these are exempted from environmental norms. Other things which are exempted are solar and thermal power plants, roads and highways. Roads and highways are among those new projects, many of which run through national parks and create roadkills. They disturb the whole habitat of a national park. A national park is not just a place where wild animals live. It's a whole integrated system where the whole system is integrated with each other, whether it's wildlife, whether it's plant life, whether it's any other thing. And when you build a highway or a road through a national park, it's not just the road kills which will happen at a later stage. It's at the stage of development. It's at the stage of construction that you're destroying the habitat and creating a situation which you cannot go back on. Of course, later on, there is also the issue of road kills. There's the issue of connecting places with each other which may not require connection. There's elephants have been killed in large numbers by railways. Panthers have been killed by road accidents. All kinds of smaller wildlife have been killed. But these kind of projects don't even require an environmental impact assessment prior to the project. And Then there are solar and thermal power plants, which have resulted in pollution, air pollution. I mentioned how air pollution was one of the leading causes of environmental damage, including damage to public health, because air pollution, of course, impacts the health, respiratory health of all of us, just like COVID-19, which is another respiratory ailment all of us are facing. And the effects of a respiratory ailment like COVID-19 are made so much worse by the air pollution and the respiratory ailments that we are already facing as a country, as a health hazard. In that situation, we've had statements made by Environment Minister that air pollution has not been responsible for a single death in India, according to official figures. All of us know the impact of these air pollution and health, and respiratory health in particular, worsened by COVID-19. These kind of statements do not generate confidence in the kind of policies which we are getting, apart from the rhetoric of following very green principles in making sure that our environment, which is so closely related to our health, is protected. Then there is the question of post-facto clearances, where if you have violations, in spite of those violations, and in spite of not having received prior environmental clearances, which we should have received from the notification which first started 34 years ago, those projects can be cleared post facto and can begin operation even without those clearances, even where clearances are required, which is not for all projects. The ministry has also at the same time diluted the coastal regulation zone regulation. It has opened up degraded forests to the private sector. The powers of the National Green Tribunal have been curbed, and this notification, the environmental impact assessment notification, seems to be the final nail in the coffin of how environment is going to be protected in the name of development. I'm all for development. I would like development. It's very easy to say that development and environment should go hand in hand. But environment, if you don't look after environment, our development is going to be very short-lived, because we are destroying the very systems which are protecting us from issues and things which we will not be able to handle later. And development alone, when it destroys the buffers between land and sea by removing the barriers in terms of sand, in terms of mangroves, in terms of other things, when the air becomes unbreathable, when the noise levels make us sick, when other things of this kind happen, it's no wonder that we have 20 lakh objections. And there is, of course, the action of the government in response to these 20 lakh objections. One of the actions was to cut off the website of some of the young people who are going to live with the effects of these notifications for their whole lives to come, and this is the legacy we're leaving for them, to cut off their websites and to block them. And this is, I hope that blocking of the website will only make young people more passionate in protecting our environment, and will give us the strength and support we need to not only object to this particular notification, but to take environment as a whole as a very serious issue which all of us need to be involved in, and which all of us need to make sure is protected for our own interest, for our health, and for the health of the world we leave behind, for our youth, who are leading us not only in this notification, but before the lockdown, were out on the streets protesting, led by the young people like Greta Thunberg, by people in India, the college students as young as 11 years old, who have been leading us. So I'd like to thank all of them, and to thank all the law students here who will be taking these issues up in a legal manner, but also we need to take them up legally, we need to take them up on the ground, we need to take the advocacy, and we need to take them up politically, locally, nationally, and internationally. Thank you.
We have a question from Mr. Ibrahim. He has asked, better governance for current problems or for the problems would affect future generations? Governments usually do not consider any responsibility towards future generations, that is, regarding our grandchildren. What do you think about this, ma'am?
Well, I think governments are formed of people, and I think every parent and every grandparent does think of their grandchildren. And so I would say that all of us in my generation need to think of our grandchildren and make sure that the government does respond to what we want. And fortunately, our children and our grandchildren, as they grow up, are smarter than we were, and maybe they will be the ones to come forward. And I come back to these suggestions and objections received. Most of them have been under lockdown, which means they have used technology that we don't even understand completely. And they have been led by young people. And this particular webinar itself is done by technology, which you people have organized, the youth. It's being attended by the youth. So I would say that maybe you leave it to us, to tell you what kind of mistakes we have made and what you can learn from them. And maybe you take it up further and lead us and tell us what we can do better to serve you, and not just lead us, but insist that we do, because that's the only way I know. Governments are made up of elected representatives, and they will ultimately give you what you want, and it's up to you to demand it.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Mr. Vignesh. He has asked, what changes would you recommend, ma'am, in the draft EIA?
Well, the very first change I would recommend is that people must not only be involved in the beginning stage, but at every stage. I think it's us who are going to be impacted by it. And it's a known fact that very often, even when there are public hearings which are set up by government agencies, and particularly in projects where they have a special interest, the public hearings themselves are not very well conducted, or they are in some way not up to the mark, shall we say. So now that we have the opportunity of holding public consultations online, and we don't have to wait for people to come, far from restricting public consultations to the district within which it's held, they should be thrown open to all, because we don't want to be known as the country with the most air polluted cities in the world, or the noisiest country in the world, or the country where 40 mines are being where our forests are being destroyed for 40 coal mines. Coal, it has so many problems with it, which is not just the destruction of the forest, but it's to do with air pollution, it's to do with the health of people, specific diseases, diabetes, silicosis. Sand mining leads to silicosis, it leads to just so many health issues. Why should we not speak up? It's not that if you have a district boundary, that these diseases are going to stay contained within those district boundaries. They will travel, they do travel. They travel through water, they travel through air, they travel through the ground. We grow crops in contaminated groundwater and on contaminated soil. We eat those crops. It's a full ecosystem, it's a full chain. And I think that we have every right to speak about our own health, whether we're city dwellers or we're rural dwellers or we're forest dwellers. Maybe city dwellers have an additional responsibility to speak not only for ourselves because we're destroying our own health, but to speak for those forest dwellers who don't know what we are doing to them by destroying their forests and then forcing them to come and live in cities under unendurable conditions, giving rise to diseases which don't affect only city dwellers, but which affect every one of us, and particularly those people who have left their villages, have left their forests, have come here to the cities, live to provide services to our country, and are threatened by these kind of diseases of our own making. I think that's the very first thing that needs to be done, that we need to be able to speak. And we not only we need to be able to speak, we need to demand our right to speak and ensure that we exercise it at all times. It's not only elections which gives us the right to speak. It's every day how you live your life, every day what you speak up for, which is going to make the country what it is in every respect, but in this case, particularly to the environment.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Ms. Gargi. Ma'am, what are your views about the Tuticorin copper plant sterile shutdown? Can this be considered a win in environmental awareness?
Well, I think environmental awareness is growing, and therefore, in some ways, I would say maybe you have to reach rock bottom to really start climbing up again. And so far, industry has taken environment as a nuisance and something in its way because it's hindering development. It has not realized that development is requires environment to be a part of it. And so maybe shutting down of plants or whatever it is, it's not good for economy. It's when people realize what the effects of these things are. You know, the Bhopal gas tragedy, so many years later, it's still just something which is written in our history books. We haven't felt it, we haven't lived it. It's when we feel it and we live it, and I'm talking particularly of the youth, that we are going to realize that this is something that we're going to live with forever. So it's better that we start looking not just at shutdowns, but at ways to improve it from the beginning. And I wouldn't like to look in terms of win and loss. I'd like to look in terms of learning and learn that these are lessons that are going to be crucial on the way and how they are to be tackled in a better way so that we don't start things and then have to shut them down. It's better to take action, preventive action from the beginning, than to allow a mess and then shut it down. That's a more expensive way too. So ultimately, we're not even saving money, really.
Thank you, ma'am.
You know, we need to learn lessons from the West. And I don't mean lessons in terms of just, oh, they're so wonderful and we need to follow them, but lessons from their mistakes. And they've made plenty. And they've made so many mistakes that they now have spent a fortune in changing those mistakes and catching up. So maybe we can find better ways of doing things to start with.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from someone named Webinar. What will the impact on polluting industry be?
Well, polluting industry, all industry is polluting to some level or the other. The question is what level of pollution is acceptable? And I would say that pollution, when it's linked with health, can't be acceptable, really, except where it's completely necessary and to the extent where we really can't help it. If we can take action to curb pollution and we don't take action, then we are spending the money that we have saved in reducing pollution on health. And since we don't have an adequate public health system either, we are really putting that burden on ordinary people who are then spending money on recovering from the ill effects of these polluting industries. So, yeah, it will have an effect. Of course, all kinds of environmental safeguards will have an effect on industry. If you take sand mining as another example, it's not that there are no alternatives to sand which can be developed. If you take power as an example, it is not that there's no alternative to coal. Even a country like Germany, which has much less sunlight than us, has a surplus of power because they are using so energy and they actually have to give away some of their power free. But a country like India, which has as much sun as we want year round, is still depending on coal. So, and solar energy, when it started many years ago, it was so expensive that nobody ever thought it could be mainstreamed. But it is mainstreamed now in some places where there's the will to do it. It's become much cheaper to use because of the scale at which it has been scaled up. When I was young, when I was your age, we believed that if there is no oil and coal, the world will stop. But it hasn't stopped. We found alternatives. We can find alternatives to sand mining. There are already some things which are being used. They are still experimental and they're not enough to make up the full volume of what we need, given that it's the second most extracted material in the world and is used in everything. But we do have possible alternatives. We can crush debris. There are residues of industrial waste which can be crushed and used. There are so many things which can be done. And the UN, in its report of 2019, said that India and China have the capacity to lead the world in the circular economy just because we have so much raw material in the terms of waste and we have so much requirement for sand. Similarly, India has the capacity to lead the world in many things because we're starting on a clean slate almost in a new way. We're making a new beginning. We haven't yet caught up with the West. And we can lead the world in these technologies. We have brilliant minds. We have engineering capacities, we have all kinds of skills, but we aren't using them because we believe we're cutting costs. We are not cutting costs, we're postponing costs.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Mr. Aditya Ohita. He has asked, ma'am, on an individual level, how can we help such movements, and also what changes can we make on individual level that cut fundings to such industries?
Well, I think it all starts everything begins with an individual. You look around you and you decide that you want to do something about something. It need not be anything very grand. Maybe it starts with just retweeting something that you find important. Maybe it started with these 20 lakh objections to the draft environment impact assessment notification. Just that one, writing that one objection was many people's first introduction to environmental activism or protection of the environment. So there are many ways you can do it, right from just using social media, or it can be in the course of the work that you do. I mean, for example, my own NGO, Vaze Foundation, which does not accept funding at all, but relies completely on voluntary activity. And when I say voluntary activity, I mean professional voluntary activity. You know, we are under this misconception that voluntary means that you stand on a road and hold a banner. No, in Bombay or in cities where there are educated professional people like all of us, voluntary activity means contributing your professional expertise. And I also believe that there is no person, or very few people at least, who don't wish in some way to give back to society, to give back to the world which has nurtured them in some way in which they live in, for altruistic reasons, but also sometimes for self-interest, because like I said, each of these things does affect you personally at the end of the day. So all the work that has been done voluntarily and pro bono, whether it's legal. My lawyers, Ishwar Nankani and Associates, have worked for 20 years without charging anything. I've had the best lawyers, the senior most advocates both in the High Court and in the Supreme Court, which would normally cost crores of rupees, but they have volunteered their expertise because they feel that what it is right. So, and of course that goes down right to the lowest process of gathering information, drafting PILs, drafting whatever, which are again contributed by very young people. Or it could be in the advertising field where people have contributed, or it could be in this world of social media where people have retweeted, or it could be in any field at all. Every single professional field is linked to the environment and to social activism in some way or the other. So I don't think I can tell you do this or do that. I think you would be able to tell me that we would like to do this or like to do that in our own self-interest. And someone like me is only there to help you and guide you. And I hope you'll reach out anytime you want to. I'm always here if you need it, whatever you need to help you along that path. But the path is new and fresh. It keeps changing, it keeps evolving, and it's up to you to make sure that you change and evolve with it faster than someone of my generation ever could.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Mr. Tanmay Patil. Ma'am, various campaigns go on around the globe. For instance, the recent movement of which Greta Thunberg was the flag bearer. How helpful are these movements compared to the practical campaigns?
Sorry, compared to what?
Compared to the practical campaigns.
Practical.
What are practical campaigns?
I don't know.
I think we need all of them, and we need practical campaigns in terms of, I would say practical campaigns could be legal campaigns. If you want to call it a campaign, it could be advertising or marketing campaigns. They could be awareness campaigns. They could be campaigns to discover new technologies. But you also need people to speak up and just say what it is that we're trying to achieve, because ultimately it's the debate about what we're trying to achieve which is going to drive the actual practical aspects of what we get. And whether it's any campaign, whether it's the women's vote campaign for voting for women or it's the Black Lives Matter campaign, ultimately it comes down to people getting out there and speaking up in whatever way they are able to speak up. Uh, Again, on the streets and social media, by contacting their local politicians, by writing books, by writing articles, just by speaking, or by telling their personal stories, whatever it takes. So I would say we need all of it. And in particular, we need young people because, as I've said repeatedly, our generation, my generation, does not seem to have understood the importance of this whole subject. We still think that GDP-led growth is the only way of leading growth. We have an epidemic of mental health. We have an epidemic of other health as a result of so much stress in the world, so much stress on our mental well-being, so much stress on our physical well-being, so much stress on going ahead the way we determine or we think is the only way to do things. There are other ways of doing things. And I mean, I don't think I'm going to tell you what you should do or what world you should inherit. That's up to you to determine. We're here to support you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A question from Ms. Rushali Ubale. How is it possible for industries to operate without environmental clearances for many years? For example, LG Polymers is operating without clearances for 20 years. Aren't there any systems which keep an eye on them?
Well, so far the most important systems have been civil society, because as Mr. Jairam Ramesh said, when he was Environment Minister, 99.9% of violations were brought to his notice by NGOs, local communities. So I think there may be many systems in place which are supposed to keep an eye on them, but the most effective have been precisely the systems which have been cut off now. And that is exactly why there's been such an unprecedented reaction to this particular notification.
Thank you, ma'am. A question from Chetana Bhosle, ma'am. Ma'am, is the proposed statue project of Shivaji Maharaj free of marine damage, as the Sea Link project has damaged the marine life and the fishermen are suffering?
Well, of course it is not free of marine damage. No project where you're pouring cement and concrete and things onto the seabed can be free of marine damage. We have already damaged the coast of Bombay, of Mumbai, to such a huge extent. The fishermen have protested against the Shivaji statue because they have said it's among their most important fishing grounds. But unfortunately, the voices of people, of local people, of indigenous people have not been listened to, and ultimately each and every one of these projects have gone to court. The coastal road which is being built has been challenged by fishermen's groups, by NGOs, and by academics, among other people. But there's a debate, and of course all debate is good. It's good to look at all issues both ways. Unfortunately, we aren't really listening to the voices of both sides. We just have something where it seems that projects are started worth crores of rupees, and then when people object because they have not been told in advance what these projects are going to do, when people object, they're told that money is being wasted because you have stopped it. You know, these projects are funded very often by international agencies which fund them, the World Bank, in the case of the Metro project, the Japanese agency. In those countries, in a country like Japan, for example, it is impossible to conceive that you can have a project like the Metro where you will, on paper, have every kind of environmental norm in place. For example, we were told that there will be no noise pollution, just as one example, and I'll pick that example because that's the other subject that I have been working on for 20 years. But when the actual construction started, there was a huge amount of noise pollution, and people who had not realized what it's going to be like, who lived along that way, who were getting sick people who were in hospital, who were old, started complaining, and they were told that now we have spent already hundreds of crores on this project, and in the interest of the long-term benefit of this city, you just have to suffer. And if you object to it, then you are anti-national. And my answer is, it is not us who is anti-national. And I agree that no one wants to waste 100 crores. Maybe you should have simply told us in advance that our health is going to be impacted to such a serious degree where people are getting ill and even possibly dying when they're in hospital and they have, say, acute heart disease and there's noise going on all night. And not tell us that we have to suffer and it's our fault. And I would like to see out of the metro project a situation where, because of the objections which people made, which we were unable to help them with through whatever interventions as citizens and as NGOs we could do, that we compile these objections and ensure that the next project which comes up in Mumbai will make sure that these particular things are not repeated. I think that's something that we can do, because the first time we are caught unaware, but according to the new development plan, for the next 40 years, we have development planned in this city of various kinds. And we don't want to be told that for 40 years, which is some people's lifetime, we are going to be suffering all kinds of health hazards and environmental hazards in the interest of the future of the city, which is undetermined, whether it's even going to be good or bad. So we want those things to be told to us upfront. And that's exactly what this environment impact assessment is. And now we have examples of what we have already suffered. So please don't be quiet. I don't know what you should do, but I know this, that you should speak up in whatever way suits you, whatever way you can.
Thank you, ma'am. A question from Mr. Julio Ribeiro, sir. In your opinion, what can we do? Can you suggest actions that students or civil society can take to safeguard our environment?
I think it's a very good thing that our students with whom we interact throughout the year and our campus ambassadors have chosen this topic and called Sumaira, who is a great friend of mine, at least an old friend of mine. And we know the type of work she has done, how she has herself been the subject of attacks, personal and physical attacks. So she has done a great job for us. She is in the list of various women whom I know in this city who have taken up causes, and I must congratulate her and also bring to the notice of all our young friends that this is the type of speaker you must introduce to the students, so that number one, they know what is what. What are they fighting for? Sometimes we do not know. As she herself mentioned, very often the government starts its plan without telling us what exactly they wish to do. Or if they have told it, they have told it to each other, not to the general public. So people like Sumaira and others who understand what is what, they should be called to explain to the students. The point is, how do our own children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, I've just become a great-grandfather, incidentally. So I have to bother about them. And then if they, there is of course a conflict between environment and development and environmental causes. I do agree about that. But in the conference in Rio, I think along the Amazon basin somewhere, they had already decided many years ago. My own brother attended that conference where they coined that word. What development? Sumaira, you tell me. Practical development.
Sustainable development.
Sustainable development. I think that concept of sustainable development has to be really hammered in, and the young people should understand. There are great scientific minds in our country, and as Sumaira says, it's very dangerous to keep on mining the sand from the riverbeds, because that, our nature has already shown us that if you go on damaging the environment, it will hit back, like it has done now in the case of of this pandemic. And we should be very clear about that. And how do we protect ourselves? Now, she said that 20 lakh objections have come to this paper that they have put out. But I think that after the students know what are the factors involved, then they can take a stand. And if they add their voices, as Sumaira said, she even adding their voices, standing up and be counted. You know, the politicians won't bother if we just shout. What they will bother about is if they find that there are too many people shouting, because there is strength in numbers in this matter. And they will shout if they know how they are going to be affected by these laws, by whatever they are trying to introduce. They are more interested in development. I'm sure we all want development, but can it be sustainable development, not at the cost of our health, of our future, of our great-grandchildren's future? Are they going to be left to the dogs or what? We can't allow that to happen. So our students must understand first what is involved, and they should get experts like Sumaira. And when the politicians know there are so many people who are opposing it, who are bothered about it, then they will sit up and take notice, because the only thing they understand is how do we come to power, and they require the votes. If they find the votes are going to slip by because of this, because of our own understanding of the issues, then they will take care that such things don't happen. Now, Sumaira was saying that as far as your sand mining, there are other substitutes, and if there is a substitute, why not use it? For example, petrol. Now it is being substituted by electric power. I was told that very soon, I don't understand much of science, but very soon there won't be petrol-driven cars or diesel-driven cars on the road, and that will help the environment, will help reduce the pollution in the air. In fact, one of the few things I've noticed is that because of this lockdown, a lot of, the air is cleared, and there are many less people getting sick. And this is something that we have really noticed after the lockdown. Of course, it cannot go on forever, because we do have necessity of using transport, and the transport will be used after some time. But I hope it doesn't come up to that same level, because people have understood that they can actually do things without relying on individual cars. So there are different things that even a thing like a lockdown has got some positive effects or positive results. So I think these are things that young students should understand and take note of. I thank my friend Sumaira for having come and enlighten them, and I wish we can come more often. We can arrange Sumaira, many other environmentalists. Bittu Saigal is a good friend of mine. I can ask him. And these are people who are really bothered about the environment. They understand it. They made it up and take notice of what they say. They are not wasting their time. They are doing it for others. And this is that they must also think of others and work for others, because that is. Yeah.
I'm always happy when you speak, Mr. Ribeiro. You're telling the students that they should listen to people like me, but I listen to people like you who mentored me.
Anyway, so is there other questions?
We'll move on with the vote of thanks. Thank you so much, Ribeiro sir, and Miss Sumaira Abdulali, for laying out your opinions. I would like to express my special thanks of gratitude to all the participants for participating in this informative webinar today. I would like to thank Ms. Sumaira Abdulali for spending some time with us and informing us so much about the notification. I would like to extend my thanks to the trustees of PCGT, Mr. Julio F. Ribeiro, the PCGT trustee, Mr. VP Raja Sir, the trustee of PCGT, Mrs. Anna Saldana, the trustee of PCGT, Mrs. Rekha Shahani, trustee of PCGT, Mr. D.S. Rangarao, RTI RTS head for PCGT, who gave us this wonderful opportunity to organize this conference. I would like to thank the dignitaries of VG Vaze College, Dr. B.B. Sharma Sir, our principal, Ms. Dr. Preeta Nilesh and Mr. C.A. Vidyadhar Joshi, the vice principals, Political Science Department heads, Mrs. Shilpa Suryavanshi, Ms. Sangeeta Aher, Ms. Disha Kanvekar and Mr. C. Ravikumar Sir, who have encouraged and supported us throughout. I would also like to thank Mr. Shivam Jain Kakaria, who supported us and helped us organize this webinar, and the organizing committee of Vaze Youth Parliament and Vaze Model United Nations, because of whom this event has been successful. I would request you all to please turn your videos on so that we can take a picture with Sumaira ma'am. Thank you.